If you refresh, they should be up there. There was a font change I had to make to some of them. So yeah, if you normally use the slides to follow along, if you refresh the Canvas page, they should be available. Okay. Are you seeing it? Okay. Got it. Cool. Great. So good morning. Welcome back. I hope you had a fun Halloween night. I got a few trick-or-treaters who had some very cute costumes. Then I got a bunch of teenagers who were holding bags in front of me and not even saying trick or treat. So it felt like a hostage situation almost, or like ransom money. So, I mean, I've got no problem with teenagers or slightly older people doing trick or treating. I might have done that once or twice, but gotta say trick or treat. Hope you had a good time and are enjoying the colder and slightly frostier weather. If you travel, do make sure to check road conditions. Say that from experience if you're new to LeGrand. ODOT is a great way to check, Oregon Department of Transportation, if you do travel. All right, so we've got a practice question for today. The practice questions from here on out will help you to prepare for the final exam, which covers everything starting from last Monday on. So you tune into a webinar. Guest speaker is talking about how to invest in cryptocurrency. Sounds sus. Guest speaker is the one doing the talking, but the conversation is meant to be educational. So the conversation can be best described as one of these four. So take a moment or two on this. Once you feel like you've got a good sense of how to answer this question, I'm asking you to do something a little bit different. You don't need to turn this in, but I would like you to think about a story that you would be interested in sharing with the class. So it might be a story about a near-death experience, something exciting that happened in your life, a really interesting travel story, maybe an injury-related experience, something that you're interested in sharing. You don't have to write that down or turn it in, but it is something that I want you to think a little bit about since we'll be going back to this in a bit. Anybody who would like some more time on this? Okay. So we talked about different types of conversations last class. This is a one-sided but educational conversation. How many people say A, dialogue, B, diatribe, C, discourse, or D, debate? Yes, so the best answer here is C, discourse. So we had a 2x2 quadrant that describes whether or not the conversation is one or two-way and whether the conversation is meant to be cooperative or competitive, right? So dialogue is two-way cooperative. The diatribe is is competitive, right? But it's one way. This course is one way, but it's cooperative. So in this case, it's the guest speaker talking about crypto, but it's doing so in a constructive and educational rather than competitive way, making that the best answer to this question. And then a debate would be two-way, but also competitive. So I want you to think a little bit about that story that you're interested in sharing, because again, that'll become relevant in just a little bit. I want to give a reminder about course registration. Raise your hand if you're a senior. Don't think we have any seniors in this class, so that part isn't relevant to you. But if you know any seniors, you might remind them that the deadline to apply for graduation is on Friday. For everybody else, right, I know a lot of you are here in your first year at EOU and might have been slotted into classes, might have talked a little bit with your advisor. The registration deadline, or the registration opening for winter 2023 is next Monday. So I encourage you to meet or email your advisor if you haven't done so already to start to plan and think about courses to take in the winter. Note that that deadline is coming up because once you get to the 7th, courses really start to fill up. So it's a really good idea to start to look at the requirements, talk with your advisor, and figure out which courses you want to take for the winter. So that's coming up. That'll open up on Monday at 6 a.m. Definitely register for the winter as soon as you can. Getting those prereqs and courses out of the way is a really good idea to be on track for graduation. So just know that that is coming up and that you should keep that on your radar. So last class, we debriefed the midterm. If you have additional questions or would like to talk about the midterm further, let me know, or refer back to the recording from Monday's class. We also talked about the recording and reflection essay and the mid-quarter feedback. And we started to talk about talking and disclosure in interpersonal communication. Today, we're going to be building on that. There are a couple other resources that I have to help you to prepare for the recording and reflection essay that I'll be talking a little bit about. We'll be looking at social disclosure and specifically at social penetration theory. And then we'll be talking about listening and doing an activity that relates to the importance of listening in interpersonal communication. All right, so I wanted to let you know a few things that will help you with this essay. So I went over a number of resources that are available to help you to prepare for this assignment that are on Canvas. So I'm not going to be going over those again. Just know that there is an example outline and that the assignment itself contains a rubric that goes over how I'll be grading that assignment. But I do want to go over a couple additional things that I've linked on the front page of Canvas to help you out for this assignment. One of these is an example transcription, right? So I am asking you as part of the assignment, which does not count to the 2 to 3 pages, to include the transcription of the audio, right? So you don't need to include the audio of the conversation itself, just the transcription, right? So one kind of easy way to do this is to include an initial of your name followed by a colon. You have the text version of the conversation, right? You have that happening with the other person. You might include, using brackets, particular elements of nonverbal communication that you're noticing from the conversation that you think are important or worth highlighting. For instance, if you pause a lot, or if somebody has really strongly emphasized a word and you want to note that for yourself later, or you're going to be using that in your write-up, that's a good idea to include. So that's an example, right, of a little snippet of how you might transcribe that conversation. And if you'd like me to look over your transcription or would like some additional help with transcriptions, just let me know. The second thing that I wanted to show you is some front matter for the Wrench textbook, right? So I am going to be asking you to include both in-text and works cited for the textbook. So I've included the first couple pages of this textbook. So that should give you the information that you need in order to fill in entering in MLA, APA, or Chicago style, right? This contains, for instance, information about the authors, the title of the textbook, and information about the edition and year that it came out to. I will also give you a fun little life hack, right? If you go into the citation maker .net, and you enter interpersonal communication. And enter the title of the book. See if it shows it this time. Yep. So if you actually enter the title of the book on Citation Maker, it has everything that you need already. So you could check the front matter, or you could go through this process and include a full works cited that's properly organized and configured in APA style. So either way, make sure that you're including the works cited list and in-text citations in your essay. Remember, the Writing Center is available to help you out, and that I will be available to look over rough drafts or outlines or work with you in an appointment. If you'd like an extension, you know that this is a big week for you. Maybe you've got exams or a whole bunch of travel. Let me know, ideally at least a week in advance, if you need additional time to complete that. Any questions about this essay? Anything we've talked about in class so far before we get started? Great. So use those resources to help you out as you're gearing up for this project. All right. So I want to continue our discussion related to self-disclosure and the process of us using conversation and listening as a way of getting to know each other better. We talked about this in the context of uncertainty reduction theory, and I also want to talk about a closely related theory in interpersonal communication, which is social penetration theory. How many people have seen the movie Shrek? Yeah, so a lot of you. It has been memed to death, but I remember when it first came out, it was pretty good. So there's a scene that's pretty famous in this film, right? The premise of the film, of course, is that he's an ogre, but he's frustrated because based on his appearance and the connotation that we give to an ogre, right, that he is seen as dangerous, as savage, but that's not really how he is, right? There's more to him than what first appears. And there's a famous scene in the movie where he talks about being a little bit more than people give him credit for. And this is essentially the metaphor for social penetration theory. So as you're watching, you might notice some of the ways that he's sharing details about himself and talking about the idea that there's more to him than meets the eye.
I had a dragon and rescue a princess just so Farquaad get you back in swamp, which you only don't have because you filled it full of priests in the first place. That's all right. You know what? Maybe there's a good reason Donkey shouldn't talk. I don't get it, Shrek. Why did you put some of that over stuff on him? You know, prime. Lay these this orchard. Grab his bones to make it bread. You know, the whole over trick. Oh, I know what. Maybe I could have decapitated an entire village and put their heads on a plate. Got a knife, cut open their spleen and drink their fluids. Does that sound good to you? No, not really, no. For your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think. Example? Example? Okay, ogres are like onions. They stink? Yes. No. Oh, they make you cry? No. Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white heads? No. Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers. Oh, you both have layers. Oh. You know, not everybody likes onions.
So if you're ever trying to remember social penetration theory, you might remember Shrek loudly yelling, onions have layers, right? I'm like an onion. So this idea you see in this conversation, obviously, Donkey has a lot of stereotypes about ogres being evil, killing people and all that. And he says, no, that's not really how I am, right? There's more to me than meets the eye. And this is social penetration theory. The idea that we as human beings have layers, right? And different parts of ourselves that over time we choose to peel back and share with each other, right? And the way that we experience these layers exists both in terms of breadth and depth, right? Breadth is the range of topics or issues that we're able to talk about or disclose with other people. Depth is how deep we're able to engage those topics. One good example is sports, right? Say you have a friend, and that friend really knows a whole lot about sports. They follow a whole lot. They follow football, they follow basketball, soccer, hockey, baseball, etc. Right? They really know a whole lot about sports. That would be good breadth. Good depth would be their ability to really talk in depth about a specific topic. So maybe they're really into football and they know a whole lot about a particular team that they're a big fan of and they grew up with, right? Breadth and depth are both elements of social penetration theory that are important for us to think about, right? We get into those deeper layers and more detail about certain topics as we feel more comfortable and get to know them better. So there's 3 different reasons why we choose to disclose and share elements of ourselves using social penetration theory. So one of the first reasons that we might disclose is to think about our personal characteristics. So if we think back to communication orientation, right? One reason that we might disclose is that we're naturally more extroverted and we like to initiate conversation with other people. So sometimes how we are as people, if we're naturally more talkative and open, might mean that we're more inclined just to share with other people. Another factor to consider, and this connects back to uncertainty reduction theory, is that we disclose considering the role of rewards and costs. Take, for example, the idea that you are disclosing perhaps a mental health diagnosis with a coach, right? And you're concerned that that diagnosis would help you to explain your situation and work with combinations with that coach, but you might be worried about how the coach is going to respond and provide feedback to you. How are they going to take it? That's an example of how we weigh reward versus cost in our disclosure. And then we also have to think about situation, right? Humans like to respond to and oftentimes mirror the ways that other people are communicating. So for instance, maybe you're talking to a friend and they got into a very long discussion about a big breakup that they had. You might respond by disclosing that you, a few years ago, dealt with a really difficult breakup yourself in an effort to frame yourself as relatable and share an experience that makes them feel less alone, right? Oftentimes, depending on the situation, or like in a class, if you're asked to go around and share some details about yourself, you're put into a context where disclosing and sharing more of those layers is useful to you. So social penetration theory says that we use disclosure over time as we develop our relationships, right? Over time, we oftentimes feel that disclosing those deeper layers is a big benefit to us as we're getting to know somebody because it helps us to connect. So there are 5 different stages of social penetration theory, right? And you can think about this as essentially different layers of the onion. One thing to know here is that this last stage does not have to happen in every single relationship. In fact, there are a lot of relationships that only go through the first 4 and stop there. So social penetration theory generally starts at an orientation stage. And we can think about orientation as the most basic information that you could give to somebody. What is your name? What year are you in school? What activities do you do, right? The very, very basic information that is just meant for them to understand and identify you as a person would be in this orientation stage, right? The exploratory affective stage means that you're starting to disclose your feelings generally on low stakes topics, right? So generally speaking, you might give your opinions or takes, right? Oftentimes you like to use hot takes as a way of very basically getting information about each other. So for example, you might say, oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of Gilmore Girls. I love to watch it in the fall. It's a cozy show and I've rewatched it a billion times, right? Oftentimes if we associate it with our interests, with media, with shows, movies, activities, things that we like to do, right? People aren't necessarily going to judge us, or it doesn't reveal really in-depth information about ourselves through that stage, right? Then we start to move into an affective stage, and that's where we start to talk a little bit more about more private and significant issues in our lives. There's oftentimes in a dating context, right, a trope that you don't talk about an ex on a first date. The idea that that's seen as a bit of a faux pas, that it might be inappropriate for the context and so on, right? In a more affective stage, you might talk about some of those greater details, right? About past relationships and your involvement in those. But this is also the stage where you start to talk about your opinions and perspectives on things. For example, your religious or spiritual views, your political views, right? Topics like that that you don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about at first blush, but you feel are important to you as you get to be closer with those people, right? And then lastly, you get to the stage. That's like a best friend, close family member, somebody with whom you can essentially talk about whatever you want. You can share really intimate and personal details and things that might be really connected to your life and to your goals. For instance, you might share that you really want to become an artist and start to develop your art, right? So this also kind of connects to thinking about things like Maslow's hierarchy. Or as we get closer to the stable stage, we start to move into belonging and self-actualization through sharing those details. Lastly, we have what is called a depenetration stage. So this doesn't happen in every relationship, but there might be a lot of relationships in which you've noticed that things have faded over time. I had a whole bunch of friends in high school. The thing that we like to do, because we're a whole bunch of nerds, was play Super Smash Bros. At lunch. And that was just our thing as a group, right? But over time, we started going to different colleges and doing different things. And we moved into that depenetration stage where we decreased our disclosures and sharing with that person, right? We kind of moved backwards just by drifting apart. And there's a good chance that you felt that with some people too, where over time, maybe with COVID, right, you've just had some distance with other people that you didn't have before. So all of those things are useful for understanding social penetration theory and about the process of disclosing people over time. Another key idea here is the idea known as the Johari window. So there's a quote that was said by the Secretary of Defense under the George W. Bush administration. His name was Donald Rumsfeld. And he had a quote that a lot of people thought was really weird, but I think it kind of makes sense to describe the Johari window, which is there are known knowns, that which we know. There are known unknowns, that which we know we don't know. And then there are unknown unknowns, that which we don't know we don't know. Which sounds like word salad, right, on face. But this idea that there's a whole lot about ourselves that other people might pick up on that we don't even know about ourselves, I think it's a useful way of thinking about the Johari window. So the Johari window is essentially the details that we share with ourselves and with other people. In this quadrant here is this idea of the open self, right? Those are details that you know about yourself and you choose to share with other people. A good example of this is clothing, right? You all have chosen to wear different clothing, right? So you might be wearing a sweatshirt or you might be wearing a shirt from your favorite team. And that's an example of the open self. You know that you like this team and you also want other people to know that too. So that's the open self, right? Or things like your name. We also have this idea of the blind self, that which other people recognize and know about you, but things that you don't know about yourself. Again, this is the reason why we hate hearing ourselves reported, because we start to pick up on tics and things that we do that we didn't realize we did at all, right? Or if you have spinach in your teeth and you're talking to somebody and they're distracted because you've got spinach in your teeth, you don't know that, but they recognize and note that with you, which would be in the blind self category, right? And then the hidden self. If we think back to social penetration theory, right, and these layers of ourselves that we haven't peeled back and shared with other people, that would be an example of the hidden self, right? For a lot of members of the LGBTQ community who might not be out to friends and family, right, that would be those aspects of identity within the hidden self. Hidden self might just be a secret or an idea or a thought that you haven't quite shared or disclosed to somebody else. There's a really cool show on Netflix, I think it's called Dead to Me, in which two friends meet at a support group, right? But the premise of the show, which is not a spoiler, is that one of the friends actually accidentally killed the other person's husband in a drive-by accident, and they don't know that, right? And they're friends with that person. That'd be an example of the hidden self. And then the unknown self are things that neither you nor the other person know about you. For example, maybe it could be that you're a really good artist and you're really good at painting, but you've never tried it and people don't really recognize that about you, right? So that would be a category of things about you you don't know yet that you might start to develop over time. So these 4 quadrants also help us to understand the process of self-disclosure and sharing those private details with other people. Anybody need any more time here before we move on? So I want to move on to talking a little bit about listening. Again, we have a course COU called Are You Listening? That goes over a lot of elements of listening and effective listening in a lot more detail. Listening is about 40% of our time when we're in conversation, right? When we're not actively talking or sending a message, we're trying to ideally listen and make sense of the message. And listening is one of those things that we're told to do, but oftentimes I don't think we're given much of a vocabulary or understanding of what it means to do listening. Listening is not the sensory auditory experience of taking in information, right? It's not you have understood and interpreted that there is a sound, right? There's a lot more that goes into listening than just things vibrating in your eardrums. Instead, as you notice, right, through these little brain symbols, listening in its 4 middle stages in particular is about how we cognitively take in and use that information. And then listening also has output in which we respond to and address that message. If we think back to the communication model for the very beginning of the term, right, you might think about the role of feedback. Feedback being the ways that we use nonverbal communication, like nodding, in order to respond to a message that we've received, right? So let's talk a little bit about what listening looks like and how we do listening. And there's a lot to cover in listening that we'll be picking up more on Friday, but I think it's good for us to start to look at how listening can be divided up. So first of all, we have hearing, right? And hearing is the sensory auditory experience of taking in a message. Your ears are picking up on it, right? Listening could also be something that's done using other senses like your eyes, right? If somebody is using American Sign Language, that would be a process of listening to, or using Braille would be an example of that as well. You're attending to the message. That is, you have perceived and are sensorily picking up on it. Understanding is the process of decoding and downloading the message. If I were to say to you, we have practice next week, right? You realize that, oh, practice means that we have practice for our upcoming track meet, right? It's decoding and realizing what that message is trying to say using things like grammar, syntax, punctuation, and so on. We also need to remember a message, or ideally remember a message, right? Beginning of class, I told you that registration is coming up next Monday. That's a good message to remember, right? So remembering the message is recalling and going back to it later. We use things such as taking notes in order to recall an interpreted message. Interpreting is thinking about the context. So if I were to say, we have practice next week, maybe I'm saying that in a very emphatic and frustrated way because you haven't been coming to practice, right? That would be an example of interpreting the context of that message. Evaluating would be judging the message, right? You judge that and say, okay, well, because I care about my friend and I want to be a good part of the team, I'm going to go to practice because I recognize that I'm on thin ice, right? That's judging the message and deciding what to do and how to make sense of that. If you get a news headline from The Onion, right, which is a satirical news site, you are going to evaluate it and say, this is satire, this is not a real news story, right? And if you effectively do that, then you're a lot better than many world leaders who have actually used Onion headlines and believe that real events have happened from those. And then responding is using communication to reply back to the message. If you find yourself in verbal disagreements or arguments with people and you have a difficult time resolving those arguments, I'll give you one tip that I think can make engaging with conflict a lot easier. And that is, if you're in conflict with somebody, ask them to paraphrase or summarize what you just said, or ask them to report back to you what your perspective is. If they can't do it, there's a good chance that they're not listening, right? Responding would be an example of paraphrasing and saying what that person said back. Can also be the use of eye contact, nodding, facial expressions, and otherwise trying to confirm that you got that message. To show that we listen, we use those nonverbal responses to make sense of a message, right? So we take in the auditory signals, right, the sensory cues. Our brains work through that process of understanding, remembering, interpreting, and evaluating. And then that goes back to us and how we express and report back about that message. All right. So at the beginning of class, I asked you to think about a story that you might be interested in sharing, right? A story perhaps about an experience in your life, an issue that's come on in your life, and so on, right? And I'm not going to ask everybody to share, but I would like to see a total of 4 volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering, and maybe you have a story that you're interested in sharing, please raise your hand. Okay, so Ollie, we'll have you go first.
I had a deer this weekend.
Oh, not yet, not yet.
Oh, well,
We'll hear from you in just a minute. So we've got 1. So I need 3 other people. These are people that will not have to share their story, but will be asked to participate. 3 volunteers. One, 2, and 3. All right, thanks, Sam. Okay, so we have 4 volunteers. So okay, so let's have you 2 take a moment and step outside. Not in trouble. Ask you to step out for a minute. And I'll let you know. So, all we will be asking you to do is share your story. And then what I'll be asking you to do is to listen to that story. And then when I call the next person in, tell that story back to them. So if you are not directly telling the story or giving the story, I do want you to still listen and follow along the story, since you'll be doing that, an activity about your listening in just a minute. So Ollie, why don't you go ahead and share your story with us?
so Saturday night, I went out for Halloween and I was a deer and I had a lot
Okay.
of fun. And then Sunday night I was coming home and I hit a deer and I cracked my headlight. And now I get my car fixed on Thursday. So yeah, funny to be a deer and then hit a deer in the same weekend. I don't know, just my luck.
Wow. That's coincidence, right? Being a deer and hitting a deer.
That's
All right, so a story has just been told, and you are going to be told that story, and then you're going to be asked to then share that story. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so basically she said, she was going out for Halloween Saturday night, dressed up as a deer, dressed up as a deer, yeah. Okay, so she's driving, she's coming back Sunday night, okay. She ends up hitting a deer, which is like super coincidental, right? She is a deer and she hits a deer, Okay. And so she's got to get her car fixed on Thursday. Pretty sure, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Come on in. So you're going to be hearing a story, Sam, and then after that, I'm going to ask you to tell that story back to us.
All right.
You're welcome to take a seat.
So I'll start on Saturday. She was like for Halloween, she was dressed up as a deer, right? And she was like going out and like she was coming back from that on Sunday and she was driving, still dressed as a deer. And then she hit a deer while she was driving. And now she has to get her car fixed on Thursday.
All right.
I'll go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
So she went out for Halloween, dressed as a deer. And then she was coming back. And she happened to hit a deer while she was dressed as a deer. Just go get her car fixed.
All right. How do you feel about how the story has transformed?
I wasn't dressed as a deer when I hit the deer, but I did hit the deer and I was deer.
Awesome. So I wanted to do a little game of telephone because I think it's fun for us to think about how we do listening, right? Because when we listen to other people, there's no world where we're going to have a photographic memory and get every single detail. But there are things that stick out to us in the process of listening that I think can be especially striking, thoughtful, engaging, right? Get our attention and so on, right? You have this story, right, about going as a deer for Halloween. And then what happens later? Well, you run over a deer, right? That element of it, right? That story, that visual is really striking, right? It's easy to say, I was a deer, and then I hit a deer, right? That's a really memorable thing to say. And so the gist of it, I think, was really powerful because we paid attention to it and what was interesting there. But some of the details, right, about when you needed to go get your car fixed, there was some hesitation about whether or not it was next Thursday, and something about the timeline of it, right, about when you were a deer relative to when you hit the deer, right, was a little bit different too. So there are some details like that and elements of that that we miss through the process of listening. I also noticed that there were ways that listening was used for nonverbal feedback. For example, Sam was asking for confirmation on Thursday, right? About when the car needed to be fixed. So oftentimes we'll use responding in a means of clarification too. So what I want us to think about here in this activity is the ways that we use listening. So first of all, for your attendance for today, I want you to think about the stage of social penetration theory that best describes the story that you just heard, right? So we talked about how there's the getting orientation stage, the exploratory stage, the affective stage, and then the stable stage. Probably not the depenetrative stage. That would happen later, right? But of those four stages, which do you think best describes the conversation that was happening earlier? I also want you to think about these different stages of listening, right? So we talked about hearing, understanding, remembering, interpreting, evaluating, and responding. How were you able to use these stages of listening to make sense of the conversation? Whether you were just in the audience and you were listening to the story, or whether you were a person that was in charge of trying to understand and make sense of the story. In your case, right, since you gave the story, you might take note of how you were listening to other people share that story, right? And then based on following along with this story, right, what are some ways that you can improve on your listening? So what were you noticing, or what were parts of the story that over time you found yourself missing? You might think about some of those parts too. So I'll give you some time to think about and share your thoughts here. We'll talk about it together in just a little bit. So I'll give you a couple more minutes to wrap up here. there anybody who'd like some additional time? Okay. How many people went with the orientation stage? Okay. Exploratory, affective, stable. Yeah, so I think that exploratory would probably be the closest to this conversation, right? Because Ollie was sharing some details with us about this experience with deer, right? And, you know, it's beyond the basic, what's your name, what year are you in school, right? It's a little bit more about Ollie's life and about, you know, this Halloween costume and this weird coincidence that happened, right? So I think that we would probably put it in that exploratory stage. You can think about those 6 stages of listening, right? You heard the message, you understood using the dictionary definition and pragmatic definition of things such as a deer and car, right? People were asked to remember and recall. And of course, we remember a lot of those important details. We might interpret that message to be that, hey, you know, maybe going out, especially at night, we got to be careful with the deer, and we evaluate and consider, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I have my headlights on a bit more. And we use things like nonverbal feedback, responding, and so on as a way of making sense to that message. Case in point, this morning, as I was driving up to campus, rather fittingly, I saw these two, like as I was driving in this morning. So, you know, deer everywhere. They're probably on the friendlier end of deer since they see people pretty regularly. But in any case, I appreciate you all volunteering and sharing a little bit about listening. We'll be getting into listening more on Friday. For today, we spent some time talking about things to know as you prepare for your essay, social penetration theory and Johari window, and the different steps involved in the listening process too. On Friday, we're going to be talking about listening a bit more and talking about how perception shapes our understanding of listening. So we can get out a couple minutes early. Please pass forward or email me your attendance for today. Have a great rest of your morning, and I'll see you again for Friday's class. Okay. Yeah.
I just sent you an email as well.
Okay.
It's like, but I just didn't know if there's something else.